This is the Law Hub podcast brought to you by Law Hub Gambia. On this podcast, we discuss critical and existing institutional frameworks, developments, and processes. Join us as we embark on this exciting journey to learn about trafficking in persons, children's rights litigation in the Gambia, women's absence at the decision-making table, barriers to women's access to justice, women land rights, and strategic litigation in the Gambia. The Law Hub podcast is proudly supported by USAID American Bar Association Initiative through its project on promoting rights and justice in the Gambia. Visit our social media platforms on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube to catch up on your favorite episodes. Law Hub Podcast, leveraging technology to promote legal literacy and enhance access to justice in the Gambia. Hello and welcome to the Law Hub podcast series brought to you by Law Hub Gambia. Law Hub Gambia is a legal knowledge institute that provides free and reliable online access to essential Gambian legal resources for researchers, students, policymakers, the legal community, and the general public. This year, Law Hub Gambia brings you a project titled Leveraging Technology to Promote Legal Literacy and Enhance access to justice on mobile, with support from USAID, American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative, through their project on promoting rights and justice in the Gambia. This project is meant to create awareness of the various legal systems in the Gambia, especially with respect to access to justice, women's rights, as well as the processes of approaching the Gambian courts and the specific opportunities and challenges. The Law Hub podcast is one of the activities implemented under this project, created to discuss critical and existing legal and institutional frameworks, developments, and processes. On today's episode, we have Ms. Victoria Andrews, a senior legal practitioner in the Gambia and a member of Female Lawyers Association of the Gambia. Ms. Andrews, could you please introduce yourself to our viewers? Tell us about yourself, your professional and educational background, and your area of specialization.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on your program. I'm a private legal practitioner. I have a firm co-founded with Lubna Faraj. It's called Faraj Andrews Law Practice. We mainly do corporate and commercial work with litigation as well. We are both members of Female Lawyers Association, and through that we do a lot of pro bono work dealing with women and children and those who have difficulty accessing legal justice. I've been practicing, I was called to bar in 2002, so that's a long time. I've been practicing for a very long time. Although it feels like it was yesterday, I still learn every day something new, but that's a profession. It's a learning profession. So I'm originally from Sierra Leone, but I'm married to a Gambian, and I've been here since 2005.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the legal profession, the fact that you're learning every day, constant learning, constant consultation. But it's an honor to have you on this platform, despite your very busy schedule. We're very appreciative that you could make the time for us. Thank you for being here. So to begin the discussion briefly, we would like for you to help our viewers to understand the land tenure system, because we'll be discussing women and land rights in the Gambia. But before delving into the topic, I think it would be useful for our viewers to understand the land tenure system in the Gambia. That's basically the types of land ownership rights that exist in the country.
Okay, there's three types of land ownership. But mainly there's customary, which prevails in the greater majority of land in the Gambia. So there's customary tenure, there's freehold, and there's leasehold. We can even extend to say there's what they call deemed leasee holders. Now, customary tenure is land which is usually communal owned or owned by families or through the alcalos or the chiefs who allocate it either directly to families, or they've been in use or possession of the land for a number of years. So that's usually customary tenure. Leasehold land is land mainly in some parts of Banjul, Kanifing, Kombo St. Mary's areas, and Kombo North District and Kombo South. That is land which was designated under the State Lands Act 1991 as leasehold land. And any other land in the future the state deems to be leasehold land will fall under leasehold land. Then freehold land, there's not a lot of freehold land, but that's basically times when the British government owned or purchased some land, and that's mainly in Greater Banjul, in Banjul, not Greater Banjul, in Banjul and some parts of Cape Point. So those are what you term your own fee simple, you own outright. So with the leasehold land, you need the government's consent to transfer. With freehold, you don't. Customary land tenure, you need also your alcalde and your chief when you're transferring to third parties, as well as the district tribunal, the district council, or the municipality to confirm. So those are the three ways you can own land.
Yeah, I think that's very important, because people tend to confuse, especially the leasehold property and communal land system as well. People tend to confuse this. So I think it's important that we distinguish. We establish the difference between the three before we get into deeper into the conversation.
I will also point out that people tend to confuse customary and freehold. They call customary tenure land freehold. They're not the same.
They're not the same.
What the State Land Act defines is actually customary tenure. Freehold is you own it outright, fee simple, and that is only in Banjul and parts of Cape Point, and I believe some parts in Basse. But
yeah, some parts in Basse, and maybe some parts in Janjambure.
It's likely anywhere where the former colonials
resided. Yes, so that's a very important distinction to make. But also, secondly, because we're talking about women and their right or their ability to own land in the Gambia, do Gambian women have a right to own land or property, and what is the source of this right?
Everybody has a right to own land or property, including women. As long as you're over 18, male, female, you can own property in the Gambia. The constitution is clear. It says that we are all equals. There's no discrimination based on sex, religion, or tribe, or whatsoever. So on that basis, everyone can own land in the Gambia. The Women's Act 2010, as amended in 2021, also goes for a step further to reiterate this position that women have a right to property, including marriage, property gained during marriage or acquired in marriage. So women have a right to own land. It's a constitutional right, and the Women's Act also reinforces this.
Yes, they do have the right, but I have observed that normally in Gambian society, especially because we live in a patriarchal society, but also the fact that a lot of women live within rural communities where it may be hard to own land. So I guess the next thing that we would want to know is the right exists under the Constitution. There's the right to own property, right? It exists under the Constitution, and as you've said, the right is also protected under the Women's Act. But is this translated in practice? In practice, do Gambian women tend to own land? How common is it for them to own land?
Well, I guess there are two parts. It will depend on where you are. I think the accessibility to land also depends on the area, in whether you're in the regions or you're in the cities. Also, it depends on how aware you are of your rights or how aware you are of what you're entitled to. Now, you find in the regions, it's a lot of communal land. It's also land which is, I don't want to say governed, it's not the right word, but it's land which is in control, is controlled by either the head of the family or the alcalde or the chief, who is usually a man. So that control then, to a certain extent, does deprive women of the right, because they then state how it can be shared or how you can access it. And you find a lot of the land in the regions or in areas which are communal, the women tend to use it in the agricultural land. It's not land they've built a house on. It's either they have a communal garden or things like that. And it's as if it's being loaned to them as opposed to them owning it. But they have a right, like any man who can go to the alcalde or the chief, to say, I would like a piece of land. sell me or allocate to me. The same way they have the right to go to the local lands department and say, I would, as a Gambian, I would like a piece of land, allocate me a land. Or I would like to purchase a land. How do I go about purchasing it? So every Gambian woman, every person in the Gambia has that right. As long as you're a Gambian citizen, you're entitled to land. However, the issue is, as you have said, accessibility. The accessibility is, as I've said, from control, from finance. There are a number of other limitations as to how they access land, as to all, again, their rights. Do they know what they're entitled to? So if you live in a community where they say the land belongs to the men, and you don't know anything else, you continue the belief the land belongs to the men and being allowed to use it without going further to say I can own the land, because that's what you've been told, and you have no means of knowing something different. In the city, even if they do say that, you may have, maybe from school or somewhere else, have access to information that says no, I can access it. Question is, how do you have the financial capability to access it? In terms of buying land is expensive, one. Two, do you have the means to know how to go about to access it? And I think those are really the limitation, is the knowledge and information.
I completely agree. And I want to hone into something you said. You said that it is possible for people, for women, or for anyone basically who's a citizen of the Gambia to go to the Ministry of Land and say, I would like to be allocated a plot of land. That's possible.
It's possible. If you look at the allocation, especially with the civil servants, if you look at Kotu, take example Canifin, Kotu, most of the allocations were government allocations, and they were allocated to civil servants. If you go back and check the leases. So they applied for land and they were given land.
Okay.
So as citizens, the land belongs to the state. The state works for the benefit of its citizens. So as a citizen, you should be able to apply to the state to say, I would like an allocation. They did the Sabaji estate. Those are all allocations, and they're given to citizens of the Gambia. The question is, how do you access that? I think that's the information people should try and find out, how they can access being allocated a land.
Yes, because I believe the general perception is that if you want a plot of land, you have to pay for it.
I think land is finite, it's not infinite. Yes. So obviously it's a question of management and a question of allocation. I am not sure what the actual policy is in place, but if you go by the Constitution, which says everybody is entitled to, and you cannot be deprived from property, and the state has certain responsibility, then I would say, as a Gambian, you should be entitled to land. Yeah. I know they sell some, it's allocated on a basis and it's sold, but people apply. It's whether you fit the criteria or you don't fit the criteria. I think it's great that that information is out there, because a lot of people, especially women, uneducated women, do not know that they have, these privileges or these rights exist, that they can apply, make an application and get a plot of land. Because even as you said, in the rural communities, most of the land is communal. It's owned by the community or it's administered by the men of the community. But then we also have women in the urban areas who do not own a plot of land, and some of them cannot afford to pay for it. But there's also a lack of understanding that you could maybe make an application to the state for a plot of land. So I think it's important that that information is out there. Another issue that I think is worth discussing is land and inheritance, especially for women. Because often we see that women who are married, when they get divorced, they lose access to the property that they live in. Or if their spouses pass away, they become widowed, they lose access to the property. They are not allowed to inherit. What is the law's position on this? Are women and girls allowed to inherit land? And what rights do they have in terms of inheriting land from their spouses or from their parents? But that again will depend on your religion. Let me put it this way. It's based on personal law. The Constitution does say that the issue of inheritance, divorce, marriage is based on personal law. And by personal law, it means your religion. So there are different rules applicable to Muslims and a different rule applicable to Christians in terms of inheritance. For Christians, in terms of inheritance, it's equal. So it's either you leave a will, in which case you specify who is inheriting what, or if you don't leave a will and you die what we call intestate without a will, then it's shared between, if there's a surviving spouse and surviving children. Okay? If there's no surviving spouse, then it goes to the surviving children, and it's shared equally. That's the Christian way. Under Islam, I understand, sorry, I'm not a Muslim, but I understand that depends on the survivors. So if there's a surviving wife, they get 1/8, I believe, of the estate. If there's 3 or 4 of them, they all share that 1/8. Girls get 1 share, and boys get, or men get 2 share of the estate. So that is how it's shared under Islam, and that would have to be followed for inheritance. I think the Qadis do the division or the sharing. For the Christians, they tend to go to court either through the curator, or they use the letters of administration or probate to do the devolution of the estate. But everyone, so there's no distinction as to you can't inherit. What the distinction lies in is the percentage or what share you get. So that's the distinction between the men and the women.
And is there any form of remedy for women who are denied this right? Because we know we live in a society where there's the rules that exist and there's the reality of what people encounter, especially women. So what can a woman or a girl child who's been denied their right to inherit land, whether they're Christian or Muslim, what recourse do they have?
Again, it depends on where you are. I think the recourse you would have is to the courts. If you're in a rural community, obviously you would start with discussing with the chief or your elders. I have not been treated fairly. If that cannot be resolved, then obviously you do have recourse to the courts. But I always say the court should be a final, last resort. When it comes to family matters, I always believe you should at least try resolving the matter by mediation first, and the courts should be a last resort, because courts can be expensive. It's not always easy to access, and it takes time for matters to be resolved. So if you can resolve it amicably, or you can resolve it through mediation, then yes. But again, I accept it is correct that a lot of women and a lot of girl childs are not treated fairly when it comes to distribution of estates. There are a number of cases on that. But the law is there. It's a question of enforcement. With regards to divorce, I think there was a new case in the Court of Appeal. I can't remember when it was decided in, but the wife was claimed, they got divorced, and the wife was claiming equal access to the property.
The Matifai case.
Yes, the Matifai case, what she called marital property. And it was agreed she was entitled to equal share. So it was divided 50-50. And that was based on the Women's Act interpretation of, I think, Section 43 as amended. So the laws are there. It's a question of how far or how willing you are to access justice using legal means.
Yeah, how willing you are to push the envelope, because sometimes if we don't test our laws, we won't know how much we're entitled to.
I agree. And for a lot of people, they tend to say, I leave it to God, or it's Allah's will, which is not, it's true. That's the society we live in.
That is
There's
the
a lot of
saying, yeah.
it's God's will. It's okay if it was meant for me. But, sometimes people take advantage of that. And I think women have been subject to that for a number of years. And because maybe also to a large extent we're peacekeeping in a way, we tend to say, well, okay, I'll accept this, or for the kids' sake, or I don't want to create too much chaos or cause too much, strife for my in-laws and my relatives. But yes, we need to assert our rights a bit more, I think.
We do. And I was at an event earlier today, and one of the speakers, a man, he said that majority of the Gambian population is women. And it's about time we started acting like we're the majority. We're the majority.
But the husbands are still ahead of the houses.
It's easier said than done.
Yes.
Easier said than done, absolutely. But also, you've basically told us what women can do where they're denied the right to own property, the right to own land. But I think it would also be important to know what you can do when you've accessed or you've obtained land. So if I were to buy a plot of land from someone, or if I were to be allocated a plot of land, what processes or should I go through to secure this right, to ensure that nobody else infringes on this right?
Okay, it's important when you're purchasing land to make sure you get legal advice. I am not saying this to create more work for lawyers. It's just to safeguard your interests. There's so many cases out there of either the paperwork wasn't done correctly, or the land belongs to somebody else. Now, if it's customary tenure land, make sure the transfer or the alcalo has written, there's a document they have which is basically like a declaration that the land is yours, has always been yours. Ensure you have that and it's stamped by the alcalo. And usually the chief doesn't stamp it, but if that's what's going to confirm your ownership of the land, have it stamped by the chief.
By the chief.
Or go so far as to get what we called certificate of occupancy. So certificate of occupancy is confirmation that you've been on that land for X number of years and the land belongs to you. A certificate of occupancy together with a physical planning clearance certificate is what you use if you were going to lease the land. Okay. But even if you're not going to lease the land, it's a customary tenure land, obtain a certificate of occupancy together with the sketch plan, which confirms that is your land and your ownership. That's for customary tenure.
Yeah.
Now, the State Lands Act also says those who have customary tenure land for land which is within the state lands, so that's Combo North, Combo South, and any other designated area, but there's none that has been designated since then.
Yes.
If you have customary tenure land, you have a right to apply for a lease. You have a right to apply for title. So if you've got customary tenure land, then I will suggest, at least if it's within Combo North, Combo South, go for a lease, apply for a lease. The reason I say apply for a lease, the lease covers what we term mapped areas in the Gambia. It is also registered, so there's a search, there's a way of tracing. Whereas with the customary tenure land, it's difficult. There's no register, it's difficult to trace, and it's not usually mapped land.
Yeah.
So it's always better to get a lease if you have. But customary tenure itself is titled, so let nobody tell you it's not proper title. It is title. But lease is a step further, and the Act provides for that. So if you've got leased land or you're buying leased land, then that is easy. You can do a search at the deeds registry in Banjul, because most leased lands are given a serial registration number because you have to register title deeds. So with that title deed, you can do a search. With that registration number, you can do a search at the registry. It will tell you who the owner is, whether there were previous owners. It will tell you whether there's any encumbrances, whether the land has been mortgaged, whether it's been gifted. So if you're purchasing land as lease, it's easier to trace the history of the land to the time at which you're purchasing it. So that's an easier transfer of title.
Yes.
That can be said for the customary tenure. The freehold land is the same. If you're purchasing a freehold land, that is easy to trace. It's registered, and you can just do a registration at the deeds register again, and it will tell you it's free from encumbrance. It belongs to the person who says they're selling or from whom I'm buying, and I can proceed. But with those leasehold and freehold land, you will need a lawyer to do a transaction, because transfer is either by a conveyance for freehold and by assignment for leasehold. So a lawyer would have to
Be involved.
to implement a transfer. With customary tenure, you don't necessarily need a lawyer because, as I said, it's not a registered land system. But obviously you can, if you're buying, make sure you go and see the alcalo, you see the chief to verify that the land belongs to whom the person says it belongs to. Also, if you can ask around the area to make sure they've been seeing that person. No, people know.
Yes, yes.
Ask around the area that X has been the one who's been here for the last 15 years. Yes, I've been seeing him. He's been coming to build the fence, or he comes and checks the garden. Because it's an informal system, so that's the only way you can verify ownership.
I think that's actually key, because a lot of cases where you see land being sold to multiple people, it's because maybe the original owner may not be too well known by the people in the neighborhood. So someone else comes, claims the land, and sells it to someone else. I've heard of a situation where the person who was selling someone else's land has their details on the fence claiming that they own the land.
Yeah.
So if the neighbors do know the owner of the property, then it makes it easier for buyers to verify the ownership, because there's a lot of that going around.
And then as well, additionally, I think physical planning has now computerized the mapping system for when they do the sketch plan. But I think it only started, I can't tell when, but it's like 3 years or so. So prior to that, ownership is not computerized, as in the mapping is not computerized.
Yes.
But anybody who's owned or purchased in the last 3 years and is reselling, it is computerized. So they can now tell if it's a double allocation.
Oh.
But we have a long way to go with all the years prior to that.
But I can see how that would make life a lot easier for the judicial system, because you do find land cases that have been in court for 10 years, from magistrates court all the way to Court of Appeals, Supreme Court. It's crazy. I think that's a good thing. The judicial system would appreciate that. Yeah. And then finally, I think our question would be in terms of policies that we have in place. What changes, in your opinion, what changes do you think we can make to ensure that access to, because we believe being able to access and being able to own, they may be a bit different. So what changes do you think we can make to our policies and maybe our laws as well to ensure that access to and ownership of land for women in Gambia is a bit easier than it is?
Actually, I don't think there are changes to the laws or policies. Gambia has Women's Act, the Constitution, the State Lands Act. We've also are party to a number of treaties and protocols and conventions. All of these put together are sufficient to protect women's rights. The question is implementation and enforcement.
Yeah.
Because even the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was adopted in 2015, is also is to strengthen land tenure security, especially for women. And women, we signed up for that. We've signed up so many treaties and conventions. Question is implementation. And I think that is a mindset change to a certain degree. Especially it's a patriarchal society.
Yes.
It's a society where I think in the old days men took care of women. And I always say in relation to Islam and the sharing, I think that was the idea. But it's no longer the case where men take care of women. We find a lot of women now work. I see a lot of women in the communal gardens. When it comes to farming, I see more women than men. I watch the cleaning of the road, the streets, KMC, they're all women.
They're all women.
Banjul, they're all women. So it means the women are working. The women are no longer at home. So they're earning. Where is this? They may not be earning as much as the men in all areas, but they have earning capacity. So with this earning capacity, why is it they still can't access or control land? Is it a policy, as in policy in terms of a deliberate policy in the regions or in the cities? I don't know. But the communal system of land holding has not helped in the regions. I think that is one area where maybe the state can intervene, but how do you intervene in customary ways? It becomes difficult, it's hard, it's challenging, because that's how they've been used to owning land. So how do you now say to them you need to unitalize this, as in it's no longer communal, but individuals should be able to own it. But I think that is, in the regions, that is the only way forward, I think, for women to have control, because they can now access it, but it's as if it's a favor.
Yes.
It's not a right. So in order to control it, they need to actually own it. So that's the whole policy, customary, I don't know, religious to some extent, change in the regions. In the city, it's not so bad. It's broken down, you can own, but then again, it's a question of, do I have the earning capacity? The price of land now is exorbitant.
Exorbitant.
I mean, say for example, Fajara, you can't even find, and even if you find, you can't afford. There's some areas where there's no land.
There's no land, yeah.
So how do they access those land? And then, if they can't access or own land, how do they then, for those who do business, if you go to the banks for loans, they always tell you need security. What is security for them? Security is usually property, a mortgage. I don't own land. Or even if I do own land, it's customary land, which is not a registered title. How do I access finance? So this whole system to some extent does perpetuate the poverty cycle.
Yes.
So I guess it's part of the sustainable development goals, but I don't necessarily have an answer. But I think the laws in place are sufficient. The issue is enforcement and implementation.
I do agree, because I tend to say that Gambia looks very good on paper. When you put Gambia on paper, it could be utopia. It's the best country, but when it comes to implementation now, and that takes changing our attitudes and the way that we perceive certain issues, especially women's rights and our right to own land, our right to education. We talk about access. That's why I say access is different from being actually able to do something. We do have access to land technically on paper, but can we own land? That's where now the difference comes in. But I think this has been a very interesting discussion, Ms. Andrews. I've learned a lot. I think my knowledge on land law has been refreshed through this conversation, and I'm very appreciative of that. And I'm sure that our viewers would also enjoy and learn a lot from the conversation that we've had. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us on women and land rights in the Gambia. And I believe this brings us to the end of the Law Hub podcast series. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We're very grateful for your support and everything that you've done for us. We're also very grateful to our producers, Right Click, for producing this entire podcast series. Thank you so much, Ibu and Lamin. We're very grateful for your patience and your support. And you can follow this podcast on our social media platforms at Law Hub Gambia on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter, now X. And thank you to USID, American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative, for the support. We're also very grateful. Thank you, and until the next series. Bye.